How should you go about talking about ADHD with your employer? What are the different options that they can provide in terms of support, perhaps a buddy system, or making sure that these conversations aren't difficult? I had the chance to talk to Jacquie Grindrod, who's an experienced developer advocate and one of the people who will actually help me in my process in terms of getting diagnosed and understanding the different things that were going on. Let's take a look and see what she had to say about it in this episode of ADHme, ADHwe. So, it's really important with anything related to ADHD is to find other people who have it, who are already outspoken about it and openly sharing so that you feel a bit more comfortable. And one of the people that has made it more comfortable for me is the person I'm with today in the interview, Jacquie Grindrod, ADHme, ADHwe. Jacquie, welcome. How's it going?
Oh, thank you so much. Hi, I'm good. How about yourself? Oh, yeah, it's good. I'm good. Yeah, we're good.
Well, just in case it could have changed. So thanks for clarifying. That's good. But with that being said, two things, not just with ADHD, but also imposter syndrome. That's something we can talk about later. Because listening to podcasts that you'd done, I was like, okay, I'm not the only one that feels like I have, a backpack full of rocks and that everyone's going to think I'm stupid and I'm going to get criticized and I shouldn't be here and I don't belong. And then, having ADHD on top of it, in my case, a lot of, self-criticism, doubt, judgment, self-esteem issues that are there as well. But I just want to get some background for folks that don't know you about who you are and how your ADHD process started.
Sure. Like how to answer who I am. Yeah, I currently work as a senior developer advocate at AWS, and my name's Jacquie Grindrod. I'm from a small town, which I don't always bring up. I think for this podcast in particular, it's kind of relevant because growing up, a lot of people didn't really talk about ADHD. Mental health just wasn't really a thing people talked about. Still very stigmatized. So I didn't actually get diagnosed until I was in university. So I'll come back to that. Yeah, otherwise, I'm based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm rediscovering my love of playing guitar and singing, and I'm a huge fantasy and sci-fi fan. I've read 30 books since Christmas. So.
Good, that's a good rhythm.
Good mix of facts in there.
No, that is a great mix of facts. We could talk about each one in a separate episode, but regarding the reading, that's interesting because that's something that I like reading, and it's got harder and harder for me over the years to concentrate enough to finish an entire book. Do you have any tips or tricks on that?
So I have found that my finishing books topic is very narrow. It has to be fantasy or sci-fi, something that gives me some kind of escapism. And it also has to, the writing styles can be different, but it has to be something that hooks me in right away. If it doesn't, I'm never going to finish it. I've been finding that it's actually been a lot harder for me now to do either computer science books, or I'm doing these creative writing books right now too. And they're really I'm either going to read it for 3 hours straight, or I'm going to read it for 5 minutes and be it's interesting.
Yeah,
I think it's just find the real tip would be find a cozy place that you like reading. I have my couch, just a fireplace I can turn on, or TV graphic. I've got it's this blanket. I'm gesturing. I don't actually know if anyone can see this, but I've got a blanket that has this little foot pocket, a little pocket, and your feet go in it, and it's so cozy. And then I don't want to move, so then I just sit there with my book, and I'm happy.
That's good. And also, do you read always at the same time? Something I've been talking about lately is the issue of routines, which affects a lot of folks that have ADHD, of wanting to have routines, not finding a way to do it, but you still have discipline to get through that many books, at that pace.
Yeah, not really much for routine. Sometimes it's morning, sometimes I just need a break, so I go for a walk and I sit outside somewhere. Sometimes it's in the evening, but I think it's because for me, it's very much so a relaxing thing, as long as I'm picking stuff that I really want to read. So.
Okay. No, once again, Everyone's going to have a different strategy. Going back to then more on the, your process, how this stuff came up, when did you, it came up that I was hey, maybe I should, go through the diagnosis process?
Yeah. So it came up in the first year of university, which I think is at least somewhat common for people that are adult diagnosed. I don't know for sure. That's just experience, so don't quote me on that. But it's, for me, it was kind of I went from being I think I was the third or fourth academic student in my high school, and I graduated. I had a really good average. And then in first year of university, my average was 49. And I just was what happened? Because it's not that like the content I was okay with. Like it was all stuff I was doing really well. I was either getting like literally hundreds or like zeros because I was just missing it. Like either 80 to 100 or like 0 to like, I don't know, whatever, because I didn't have enough time or whatever. So I went home and I remember talking to like this nurse. I can't remember. It was like completely unrelated. It was something else. And they were just like, oh, like, how's university going? And I was like, oh, it's been like really hard. Again, small town, childhood nurse, somebody I've known for a long time. And they're just like, oh, like, is it because of your ADHD? And I was like, ADHD what? What are you talking about? And they're just like, oh, did you never get diagnosed? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, I'm going to backpedal and suggest that perhaps you should go talk to somebody and get a diagnosis. And that kind of kicked off the whole conversation. And that was a whole process too. I don't know what it's like where you are, but for us, like we had this giant stack of paperwork and they have to talk to like your parents and they do all this work too. And at the time, my mom was like very apprehensive about like, oh, I don't know about mental health problems. Like, I don't know about this. Like, I think you're doing fine. Like, you know, just keep going. Like, you're going to get together. Like, just, it wasn't like she grew up in an even smaller town. It just wasn't a thing for her that was like at all common. So it was kind of a lot of like learning process there.
Yeah, and like you said, each case is different depending on where you live, depending on, you know, what kind of a town or city you came from, you know, how frequently folks talk about, well, you know, mental health and that the idea like, no, you'll grow out of it or shake it off as if it's like a sore throat and, you know, wishful thinking. Like, yeah, believe me, I wish I could do the same. But so you get through university and then you get into the professional world. What's that been like for you?
I think it has its ups and downs. Like there's moments where it's really helpful. Like I think a lot, I honestly think a lot of the conference talks I do, you can find the kind of threads of ADHD through them. Like something that I do to help myself keep focused when I'm writing these talks is I usually do kind of like two themes. A great example of this is my Legend of Zelda conference talk I did at DevOps Days, Vancouver and Chicago. And the whole premise is it's about like, basically, what kind of player onboarding experiences can we take from 30 years of iteration in The Legend of Zelda and the patterns that we find there, and how do we apply that to onboarding employees in the professional world? Because there are patterns that are similar, you know, like do you have like a linear quest chain where it's all like kind of back to back, stuff like that. And I think that's kind of an example where I kind of pull that like creativity side that we're pretty known for, but it also helps me stay engaged with writing it, and it helps me have more fun doing all the parts too. So
yeah,
yeah.
No, I can definitely relate to that. And one of the things that comes up in these conversations is a characteristic. I don't want to say common because I don't have research to back it up, but the ability to link two things that don't seem, you know, intrinsically linked or naturally. So
yes,
you know, once again, which is creativity and being able to blend those things. I think from a content perspective, audiences will find it very refreshing that someone's able to bring a concept to life. And that's been something that I definitely try to do because I think it makes it more exciting and it makes me more excited to do my job. And so like what you said with that too, I think, yeah, that's a big factor. Other things around that. So, and let's see, I've never actually talked about this. People saying there's a lot of correlation between folks who have ADHD and folks that are working in DevRel or community. Would you agree without having any evidence to back that up? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, again, no statistical evidence, so
none.
It's not scientific, but I will say that subjectively, I was really surprised by how many people in tech actually have it. And then another level was DevRel, because I feel like every other person I talked to in DevRel, which could, again, this could also be like self-selecting, you know, you find people that you get along with well, and you're like, oh, you do, me too, no way. But I feel like it's been a lot higher than anywhere else in my life experience. And I've actually talked to quite a few people about that before. And one of the things we came up with was that there's just so much variation in the role, because like I could be working on tech today, I could be speaking at an event tomorrow, I could be podcasting right now. Like, you know, there's just so many different ways to kind of stay engaged. So I don't know about you, but for me, like if I hit a month where like all I have is like blog post writing and I don't know, conference talk, like all I'm doing is writing, I have to start tricking my brain into thinking it's a different task. So I'll start like doodling it and like making it art, like handwriting it with different pens, like stuff to be like, this isn't writing, brain. See, it's drawing. It's fun. And I think just kind of having that variation helps a lot for our brains.
I agree. And that's what I often tell people, that yeah, for me to do a sort of traditional job, whatever that means, would be really, really tough. And so needing to have that variety and almost healthy distractions of like, I'm doing this now, but I know I'm going to get to do something else later. You mentioned this when we talked before about drawing. Going
Yes.
more in depth on that. What's the deal with that, and what do you get out of it?
So it's kind of funny because I actually think I'm a terrible drawer. Like it's never been something I considered my strength, but I always like doodling in class. Because you just doodle and like it helped me process, but also kind of it just helped me keep my fidgeting occupied in a way that wasn't disruptive, but let me like listen. Because like if as long as I wasn't like other words, 'cause I don't know, I can't listen, I can't word and word at the same time, but I can like image and word at the same time, if that makes sense. But as far as like the staying focused, it helps to just like, I guess it's like the whole picture. Like it's like I'm getting off my computer, I am changing like the texture of what I'm working on because it's no longer a screen, it's now paper with pen and like markers. Instead of working with just like black and white letters, I've now got colors. I can like draw images instead if that helps to like get me going and like thinking. So I usually just do that long enough until I have like basically a rough outline of what I'm planning on writing and I've got some like energy and I'm excited, and then I can go back to writing. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I think once again, it's finding a technique that sort of, I don't want to say tricks you into doing something that might otherwise be tedious, but it definitely seems to be effective.
For me, it definitely feels like tricking. I'm like, look, brain, not the same task. What a surprise.
But I think that's healthy and helpful, because if it seems just like this dull, dreary, it's and then another thing as well too, in a previous conversation, in a previous podcast, was about how some of the smallest things are the things that can take the longest. A perfect example: recording intros for these podcasts. My editor, bless his heart, will ask for like 2 weeks, like, can you do the 30-second intro for the person you interviewed because the episode's dropping tomorrow? And I'll be like, nope, not going to do it. And I don't know why, because it's not that I really don't like to do it. It's just in my head, like that task sounds unbearable. And so finding ways to make those things easier. And I think also, thing that we explain to a lot of folks or I talk about a lot is that a neurotypical brain or a non-neurodiverse one, and once again, no research here, so don't call me on anything, please. The dopamine hits because of completing tasks, like not getting that. And
I can't imagine, like, that would be so nice. Like, I don't get that. The way I work around that is if I finish a task, I literally tell someone, like my boyfriend or my mom, I'll be like, oh my God, that big task I've been stressing about? I finished it. And then I don't get the dopamine hit until they reply and they go, oh my God, yeah, that's so cool. And then I'm like, oh, we're sharing it now, I'm excited. But until that point, like, my brain's just like, okay, another cross off the list. Like, it's not excited.
That's it. And the feeling that unless you get outside approval or recognition, that what you've done just doesn't count or it doesn't matter. And it's really hard. Like that's been a significant struggle for me, and also with employers, that I don't need someone like showering praise on me or giving me trophies and ribbons. But how do you make it clear to folks that like it's not just, and if I've done it bad, like if I haven't done it well, tell me that as well. Like I need that feedback. Is there anything you'd like to comment on there?
Oh, that's a hard one. I feel like right now, especially, like I'm rethinking a lot of my relationship with ADHD and work and how I've been doing my career up until this point. Because I don't know how to, like, I think like just I'm in a senior role now, and I think there's much more, especially as like a dev role, there's a lot more just content throughput and just more delivering than I think I've ever done in my career. And I'm finding that like processes that worked before are starting to kind of like bottleneck. They're basically bottlenecking. Like I'm not getting enough energy out of what worked before, or I'm not getting enough efficiency out of it. So I don't know. Like the long answer to what you asked is basically I'm rethinking everything in that front. But what worked in the past was like I'd have like a coworker buddy or two that, whoever I worked closest with typically, that I would check in and be like, hey, do you mind if I like share this thing I did? And then I'd share it, and then they'd just be like, yeah, it looks good. And then I'd be like, yeah, and then I'd just move on, and that worked really well for me.
Yeah, but like you said, the same strategy won't necessarily work in different phases, but some variation of that. I think, for me is that I try to have folks that I can use as sort of a sounding board or like a mirror of like, okay, like I have no idea if this is good or not. Maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but if I don't ask, then I won't know. And my assumption will be, this is awful, this is terrible, and no one's going to like it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's hard too. And I do also wonder how much of that like ties into RSD. I'm just gonna throw out there that RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, for anyone listening that doesn't know, that was like probably the most mind-blowing thing for me to learn about, because I read it and I just was like, oh my God, things make sense. Like that's why I'm like that. Like,
Yep. And both in terms of the reaction towards rejection, as well as all the things that I will do to prevent rejection from happening, in the
yeah.
sense of overworking, doing all these things that nobody asked me to do. So that way it's like, that way you can't get angry at me or you won't reject me or whatever. It's like, no, they'll know that you will basically work for free. And some people will take advantage of that. And that's even more toxic. That was definitely one of the biggest wake-up calls for me, was learning about RSD. And for anyone who has ADHD or is interested in knowing about it more, take a look at it, because it's also, once again, a lot of this stuff is quite new. So there is some science, but there's still yet to be a lot more. And it's not just one thing, but it's more like a collection of different symptoms that can play into that. And once again, each case is different. Has there been anything that's been helpful for you to tackle that?
I honestly, it's one of those, for me, it's been one of those cases where just knowing that it's a thing, and I think this applies to RSD, this applies to ADHD. My ADHD also came with anxiety and depressive episodes. Just all of those, that little bubble, I think were vastly improved just by knowing. Because then I had something I could look up and like kind of be like, oh, like, you know, maybe this is common. Like maybe, you know, it's not something wrong with me. Like other people deal with this, and then you can look up how other people deal with it, and from there it just gets a lot more manageable, because instead of just being this giant like looming emotion that, or like feeling that you're just like, why is this here and how do I get rid of it, suddenly you can start chipping away at it. So I think just the knowing was really helpful.
Agreed. And because until you know, yeah, it's just you're lost in your own thoughts and assumptions, and it's very lonely, and you don't know how to explain it, because you're like, no one's going to get this. And same with anxiety and depression. That was also something that before I knew I had ADHD was there. And so, you know, there's all this unpacking and that happens through that process. But anyway, this is all very good. You going back to the work thing, you know, particularly right now at this point, you had mentioned something specific going on related to work and accommodations. Could you explain that more in detail?
Yeah. I feel like this is one of those things that classically people are like, oh, don't talk about it publicly, which is why I feel like it's like important to talk about publicly. But so like I said, I've been like rethinking a lot of things about how I approach work, and some of the things that were working for me just weren't working anymore. A really good example of this actually is deadlines. This is like the perfect example. So in the past, if I had a deadline coming up, my brain would be like, oh, we can't procrastinate anymore. We got to get together, right? But now my sense of deadlines has shifted to, is it live in front of an audience? And if it's not live in front of an audience, that big kick-in reflex isn't happening. So I'm sure you can imagine that's leading to some other things. So I kind of hit this point where I was like, okay, like this isn't working. I need to figure out something else now. So I've been looking into workplace accommodations, which is something that in the past I'd kind of avoided doing, partially because stigma, partially I had accommodations briefly in university. And I think the whole process for me was just not really worth it, because there was a lot of shame involved, and there was a lot of like documentation and like words that I just didn't want to have associated with me, constantly kind of being labeled on me. So I didn't like it. I stayed very far away from it. That would have been like 10 years ago. So now I'm kind of going through and trying it again with like a fresh start, basically. And so far I've only had well, I should probably step back. I've reached out to kind of look at what kind of accommodations there are. At Amazon specifically, I'm looking at them. And I found like a really cool program that's like basically like a coaching program. And I did have a similar offer in university, but it didn't work for me then. I don't think I was ready. I think I was still processing that I was diagnosed. I just didn't want to deal with it yet. Like I just wasn't ready. But now I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to like listen to the stuff. I'm ready to like try and figure some things out. And so I've got this like, basically it's like a 12-week coaching program where I'm paired up with somebody who like, this is literally their job, is to do accommodations and to support people and kind of help them get like the tools to improve or like to build better structure. And so far I'm really liking it. Like it's been nice to have this space in the office where I can just be like, hey, I know I have a hard time with like, consistently communicating or like documenting everything, like things that are like classically not great for ADHD brains. Like, seriously, the classics. And so we've been talking through like, okay, what are the priorities for the things you want to work on? And then he's kind of been coming back with like structures or frameworks or resources. And that also includes like, hey, like I noticed you're in Vancouver. So here's a list of either therapists or other mental health resources that I don't know if you need them. You may not, but at least you have them. And that's just been so nice. Like I'm only 2 weeks out of 12 weeks in, so we'll see how it goes still. But I'm feeling really optimistic because it's nice to be able to have somebody come in and be like, hey, I've worked with other people who have similar challenges to you, and maybe in similar roles, maybe not, but here are things that help them. And like they've got a whole team of people that do this. There's like a whole like an internal wiki on like tools and resources and like best practices and like even like the tips that they've like aggregated, and just kind of being able to like peruse this has been like really nice. Like,
And I think the very reasons that you mentioned previously as to why people are often hesitant about going through this process, I'm not asking for pity. I don't want to be the center of attention, believe me. As much as I do like being the center of attention in certain environments, I don't want people feeling like I need the red carpet rolled out for me and things like that. What it is that, and in my case being a freelancer, it's not really a thing. It's on me to basically tell people like, look, I have ADHD. So just so you understand, like, documentation or things like that. That's why I will use external resources to help out with that as much as I can and delegate things as much as I can. But it's never about saying, you need to bend over backwards and do all these different things for me. Is that, no, I'm being transparent with you so that I can do my job better and that we have realistic expectations and you don't get disappointed. Because if you work with somebody else, it might work in a different way. But these are the things that I'm going to do well, and then other things that will be more challenging.
exactly. And it's helpful because I'm getting like, when you're just like, just be better, and you're just like, but how though? I want to be better. Trust me, I've tried for like 30 years on this, but like, how though? And having that like person that's kind of like, oh, I'm not saying this will work, but here's the whole list of things that we could try. We just have to find the one that fits for you. And I just was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So nice. Like,
it is. And like you said as well, too, that they're not looking down on you. It's someone that's worked with people in a similar situation before. So it's, it's nothing personal. Obviously, each employer is going to be different in terms of how they approach this. But so once again, we're not telling everyone, go out and run and tell your boss or your company that like, this is what you need to give me. At the same time, see what resources are available inside the organization. And if they aren't, look for ones outside. One of the first things that came up when we did the panel in Detroit was a person came up to me and said that she thought she had ADHD, but in her country it wasn't diagnosed and then was trying to get diagnosed in another place. And through just a couple of Google searches of seeing like, okay, what are the ADHD resources that are in your area? Are there groups? Are there therapists that are specialized in this? Where can you go and get help? Be proactive. And luckily now more and more, I got inspired to do this podcast because there's a great podcast from the UK about adults ADHD. And so obviously it's very much focused on the UK, but if you start looking around, like just like with tech, like make community part of the solution. I think with this as well, the more you connect with people and the more you get exposed, like, oh, you're doing that. Oh, I had never thought of that. Like these things make it more, available and accessible. With that in mind, in terms of resources, are there any resources that you've used, whether it's been books, whether it's been podcast videos that you would recommend?
That's why I didn't finish the form. Now I know. I couldn't think of what I wanted to put for that answer. Classic. I think not so much books or podcasts, but there's like a couple specifically for ADHD. Actually, I found a couple Twitter accounts who are artists that make comic strips or just relatable posts about having ADHD. And I found those really helpful because that kind of has like, you see the post and then you see what other people are saying about it. And then you're just like, oh, wow, that's me. Or, oh, wow, like I relate to that. So like ADHD_alien on Twitter is one of the people I'm referring to here.
Got it.
And who's the other one? It's, I think, ADHD Donovan or ADD Donovan or...
It's cool. Don't worry. We can send it over later. We'll put it in the show notes. It's fine.
Okay. We'll find that one. But yeah. And there's just like, that's how I learned about RSD actually, is one of these like comic strips. And then you see it and you're just like, oh, that makes so much sense. And you just, yeah, it's just nice to have that space that's like I think especially with stuff like mental health or ADHD and things like that, that's like, it's persistent, it's a part of your every single day. Sometimes it can feel really heavy and frustrating. I think for me, having a space that where like, oh, I can look at this artwork that it's kind of poking a little bit of fun, it's a little bit lighthearted, but it's still tackling like the harder issues with it. I think that kind of warmed me up to being able to look into it more too, because up until that point, it was still feeling very like overwhelming. So
it can feel very heavy and like you're just adding more responsibilities to an already full plate. And so that's why with this podcast from the UK, it's these two guys just berating each other and using lots of dark humor. But then they also use neuroscience. They're both neuroscientists and they both have ADHD. And so that way of sort of breaking the ice for me has made it much more comfortable. And that's where I learned about RSD and lots of other things. So I once again, it's not one size fits all. I think everyone needs to find something that works best for them, be it podcasts, books, videos, etc. We are almost out of time because I made a horrendous mistake of forgetting that there is a time change for these 2 weeks between North America and Europe. So, but what I would like to do is once you finish this 12-week program, I think that gives us the perfect excuse to get back in touch and see, how that's going and what's been your experience. So this is good. It wasn't planned to be a 2-parter, but there could be at least 2 parts and perhaps 3. And I want to talk more about Zelda in the next one and all other things as well too regarding fantasy literature, because I think that's always exciting and there's always a lot to learn from that. Is there any final message that you'd like to give folks or recommendation to folks out there with ADHD or family members or coworkers? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think the final message, I think you touched on a bit earlier, is just you're not alone. Like there's people that are successful. There's people that are like they have social groups. There's people that are in communities that all have ADHD and whatever kind of stage you're in, if you're listening to this, I just want you to know that like you can kind of keep going through. Basically, you can keep going through it. You're gonna get through it. Okay, like it can be really hard. Like it's hard for me right now too, but you'll get through it.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it sounds, what an oversimplification. No, it really is. Luckily, many things in life aren't that simple, but this one is, and you're not alone. Don't suffer in silence and find what's going to work best for you. And it's a process and you have to be kind to yourself because as you said earlier, the strategy that works today in 6 months for a ton of different reasons, it might change. So give yourself the space and, self-kindness and self-care to be able to respond to those things as they come along. Well,
yeah. And most people want to see you succeed. I know it's easy to hear somebody criticizing you and go like, oh God, like I'm just frustrating them or whatever. But most of the time they're doing it because they want to help. Like not always, so don't take this blanket statement, but generally I think people are good and want to see each other succeed. So just be kind to yourself.
Agreed.
You made it this far, you'll make it further.
Absolutely. Anyway, Jacquie, thank you very much. Very much looking forward to catching up and seeing how the process is going. And in the meantime, keep kicking ass with all the great stuff you're doing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been great having this conversation and thank you for having me on the podcast and we will see how part 2 comes out.
All right. Take care.
Have a good one.